we'll start off with that one question. Everything that we are seeking, is it fundamental? Jesus famously said, seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open unto you. So what are we looking for? And generally, I mentioned previously, the Maslow hierarchy of needs pretty much summarizes the variety of needs that we feel we have. And then maybe there's a difference between needs and wants. We need food, there's no doubt about it. We need air, there's no doubt about it. We need sleep, we need rest, there's no doubt about it. And in this modern world, we need an income also, there's no doubt about that. And then what that income provides, that becomes divided into needs and wants. But none of this, as I mentioned, satisfies the answer to the most fundamental question, and that is, where is it all coming from? What keeps it going? And where is it all going? There's a very fundamental question that's going way, way back. It looks like a modern question because modern science is also trying to understand these issues in the form of, where did this universe come from? And where is it going, if it's going anywhere? And that's a fundamental cosmological question. And the same question comes in biology. If you take the evolutionary understanding of things, where is it all coming from? Because although Darwin's book is entitled Origin of the Species, really it's nothing to do with origin, it's simply to do with commonality, that we are all descended from the same, something like a tree, with the same roots and the same axis, but different branches. That's the original idea. Modern physiology has shown that we have to make a variation of that because, of course, Darwin had no idea about the cellular structure of things in those days. And he had no idea about what findings there would be in the fossil record. And we have something called the Cambrian period, which is an accelerated kind of biological process, evolutionary process, we might say, where species seem to suddenly appear in the fossil record. And there is nothing in the fossil record that shows slow progressive partial changes. And Darwin himself recognized this as a potential flaw to his entire theory, that evolution must be slow, must be progressive over a period of time. Mathematically, though, it doesn't work out. So this Cambrian period comes with a theory called punctuated equilibrium, which says that there is suddenly a surge of something, but it doesn't give a mechanism for it. That's the difficulty. So there are many, many outstanding questions. And when we inquire, as the Upanishads have inquired, what is this thing called Brahman? In other words, what is the foundational thing? Where does it all come from? What is the origin? And is that origin the same thing that keeps it going? And where is it heading? So the Taittiriya Upanishad is very interesting because it brings up these questions and brings up these answers. In one place, it does it as a kind of story. And I suppose we have to ask, what is the beginning of the story? It's not mentioned in the Upanishads, but we'll insert once upon a time. And the whole subject will be to do with a knower of what is understood to be bliss, since if we're looking for happiness, the most superlative happiness that we can find can be labeled bliss. It's much more than joy. It's much more than contentment. It's much more than the ordinary kind of peaks and troughs of happiness that we get in this life. You know, a sadness followed by a moment of interest or a moment of happiness, a smile followed by a frown, etc. That's normally the seesaw life that we have, the ups and downs. And so we can deal with these questions, the knower of the bliss of that origin, this Brahman that we're looking for. If we were to know that, if there is such a thing, we would be saved from fear. And so the third chapter of the Taittiriya Upanishad deals with this issue. It tells us that whence words return along with the mind, yato vacho nivartante aprapya manasa saha anandam brahmano vidvan na viveti kutashana. Whence words return along with the mind, not attaining it, he who knows that bliss of Brahman fears not from anything at all. What is the great difficulty we have is fear. Why do we have contemporary wars today? Is it not because the fear that somebody may take my territory, my land? Is it not that somebody will take my rights away? Is it not that somebody will dominate me and enslave me? And when we look at all our fears, our phobias, there are multiple phobias. There is a system of kinesiology. We can muscle test for various fears. And then what's the remedy? We can associate those phobias actually to certain internal statements that we are making and have been making maybe all our life. And so the remedy for that is to face what we are fearful of and revalue it, see it from a new direction. And once we do that, it seems that fear disappears. A wonderful exercise like that. You can create an artificial scenario, a kind of dark forest. And you can even play some sinister music that goes with it. We're walking through a dark forest and you are lost, totally lost. And it's getting darker and darker and darker. We'll understand that because today the days are getting longer and longer and longer. And so by very early in the evening, things are getting dark, particularly if we've lost our way and we don't know where the path is. And these shadows come, they're simply branches, but to our imagination, these are monsters. And then at the end of it, at some point, we see something like a threatening monster. And we're pre-programmed to ask, please tell me, what is your name? Please tell me, what do you want? Where are you coming from? How can I help you? And having a conversation, a dialogue with these demons, as it were, we come to a conclusion, and there's a natural process where the demon actually becomes something like a caricature. And we no longer fear this. And ultimately follows us or disappears or whatever it is. Making friends, how can I help you? This kind of approach. And of course, all these fears are part and parcel of reactions in the mind. And they sit deep with us sometimes. And what is the antidote to fear? This passage is suggesting bliss. If you are able to discover bliss, fear is gone. But then what is bliss? Bliss must be something that doesn't change, something that is indescribable. And so, this Upanishad tells us that any description, any concepts, words, return along with the mind, having inquired, what is this? And he who knows that bliss of Brahman, so whatever that source is, whatever the origin is identified as bliss. And you cannot have bliss and fear. The two cannot coincide. So such a one, says the Upanishad as it continues, itam havava na tapati. Such a one, truly, the thought does not torment. Why have I not done the right thing? We are plagued very often with guilt and with evaluations of, did we do the right thing? Did we do the wrong thing? Self-doubt or self-criticism. Why have I done the thing and the sinful things? And it says, he who knows this Brahman, saves himself from such thoughts. For truly, from both of these he saves himself. He who knows this. And then it goes, such is the secret doctrine. So we have some examples of this. The great mystic Evelyn Underhill, in her book Mysticism, will tell us, she said, virtues I take leave of you forevermore. Your service is too travailous. Once I was your servant in all things, to you obedient, but now I am delivered from your thraldom. And so this is the Upanishad, this is the great mystery, Parama Rahasyam. Now then a story follows. And as I say, we can preface it with once upon a time. There was a very enlightened person called Varuna. Even the name suggests something to us, because Varuna is the name of that being, that Vedic entity that represents waters. Is the kind of the chief of the waters, the prime minister of all the waters in the world, all flowing things. Anyway, he has a son called Bhrigu, and Bhrigu approaches his father Varuna, and he says, Venerable Sir, teach me this thing called Brahman. And we have to understand the first stanza before that, which is a whole section, section 9, and it goes into another chapter, but they're two tied together. It's identified that Brahman is actually bliss. But now we don't know that. It's just that we're looking for it. And so Bhrigu, like all of us, is looking for it. He's a well-educated person, son of a great sage, educated in everything, but this one thing, he wants to know what is the origin, what is the fundamental thing. And one thing about our Vedanta philosophy, it likes to go to the broadest generalization. For example, we know that there are different forms of energy, but is there one energy from which everything comes? And our answer from yogic experiences, yes, we call this prana. Then there is one matter. Is there there are variations of this matter. It comes in various atomic forms. Is there one thing? Yes, there is. And we can call this Akasha. We have prana, energy, we have Akasha. These are the two fundamental unitary essences of whatever else follows. When we get the highest generalization, then we know. Like when we know rice in general, then we really know every grain. And so there's an axiom that is applied in Vedanta that says, whatever I investigate here in me will apply to everywhere. Now, this occurs in some truthful examples, scientific examples that we know today. Einstein had this special relativity. He took some principles to do with gravity and applied it everywhere and said, if it's true here, it'll be true everywhere. And experiment so far has validated his position. So we can see how there is space is a kind of a pliable thing subject to mass and creates a distortion, and we are able to see this distortion. So the principles that he applied in terms of gravity, they all work. Relativity works. All the equations come out well at the moment. Now, we know people know it's incomplete, but so far so good. So the highest generalization here is called Brahman. And the root comes from Brah. It means the thing that seems to express itself forever, infinitely. But it's still beyond description, beyond words. Words come back together with the mind. So he's asking this, and his father then tells him that matter, life, sight, hearing, mind, speech, that's all he says. But what's his inference? His inference is saying that you have all the instrumentation to find it out, and all of these things that we all observe life. We all observe energy. We all observe the things are living. We all, and in contrast to that, we see things which are seemingly not living. We have all the objects that are in front of us, subject to sight. We have sounds that we hear. We have the mind that absorbs it and tries to work it all out. And we have speech that expresses what we find. But there's an origin to all of these things also. So there's not only an instrumentation, but there is something that is enabling this instrumentation. And so it's suggesting that Brahman is the thing which enables all of these things, if you can find it. And then further he says, Tamaho acha yato va imani bhutani janti yena yatani jivanti. That truly from which these beings are born, that is all things, all beings, everything that we regard as beings in a world, the universe in other words, that by which when born they live, that into which when departing they enter, that you need to look for that. Because that is what is called Brahman. And how do you discover it? Well, there's the standard method. You perform tapasya, that is austerity of thought. In other words, you contemplate it, you dwell on it, you analyze it, you take a scientific approach about it, and you meditate upon it. In other words, you use your mind as a searchlight to find out what is the truth. And meditation is like that. It is applying the mind as a searchlight to find out what is the internal truth, which is more subtle than what is obviously there on the outside. So he goes and performs that. Now his father, Varuna, is of course teaching his son sacred wisdom, and he could easily tell him everything up front, but no good teacher tells that, because the idea of discovering things for yourself has to be applied. Same thing in modern science, same thing in spirituality. You have to go on a self-discovery process. Nobody else can do it for you. All we can do, all anybody can do, is to open up the paths, remove as many obstacles as possible, make the suggestions, and this is what Varuna indeed does. So the fundamental definition of this Brahman as that from which the origin, continuous, and dissolution of the world is not really describing the transcendent cause, it's describing the potential cause and the immanent cause, what we call really God. There's no word like that. We have this word Ishvara, which has the implication of a kind of sovereign. That is a world-creating, world-sustaining, world-dissolving entity. We can call it God. Then are there two different things? Is there Brahman, and is this creative energy, this God that we normally apply as a concept in the world? No, it's the same thing. Brahman is the cause of the world as the substratum. This is technically called adhisthana. As the material cause upadana of the world, as gold is the material cause of ornaments, as the instrumental cause of the world, even according to the dualists. So this is a beautiful example. Gold, you cannot have gold and the ring. You cannot have the substance and the form as separate, as different. The two are the same thing. And then really what we're looking for is, supposing, we can use an analogy, there's a clay pot, or let us say some lamp with kind of holes in it, or a clay pot even with holes in it, and a light candle inside. Then to an uninformed person, it looks as if there's a living pot. And we can see the eyes shining, and we can see the life, and we can see all of that. But we have made a mistake. We have superimposed living a living entity as something which is actually borrowed energy. It's just reflecting the glory of the light that sits already within it. So now he makes a conclusion that many of us will make. The conclusion would be that matter is that Brahman. Matter is the thing from which everything comes. So in other words, makes the common mistake of many atheistic scientists today and says, matter is all that exists. Matter is that Brahman. From that Brahman, from that source, comes all the whole of matter. So he makes that conclusion. He says, Anam Brahmate Vyajana. He knew that matter is this Brahman. For truly, what's his reasoning? Beings are born from this matter, and when they're born, they live by matter, and into matter, when departed, they enter. That's a logical process. And having known that, he again goes and approaches his father Varuna and says, Venerable Sir, you can teach me that Brahman, because I have concluded that it comes from matter, but I can see maybe that's not satisfactory on analysis. The first suggested explanation of the universe is that everything can be explained from matter and motion. But on second thoughts, we can realize that there are phenomena of life and reproduction which require another principle than matter and mechanism, a mechanistic view, because today that is all to do with quantity, numbers, mathematics, equations, but nothing to do with quality. And every scientist will tell you it is all just quantity. In their heart of hearts, they don't really believe it because they get emotionally disturbed, they get attached to families and friends, they experience joy and sorrow and so on and so forth. It's not just bare matter. Something else must be there. Some subjective experience is there along with it. So we have to re-examine that. And after all, what is this matter? The Taittiriya Upanishad already tells us this, that it is really made from food. And when we look at it in every context, we'll see that something is issued and something is consumed. And that thing that is consumed goes and itself becomes consumed. This is a kind of cycle. And so he's quite right. It seems that from matter we are born. In other words, XY chromosomes join together, and it is purely biological. It's all just matter. And then food sustains us while we're alive, and it gets converted into the body. And then when the body has had its day, as it were, then it goes back into matter, goes back into decay. Or if you go for cremation, it goes back into the elements from which it came. In any event, it's all matter. So he then has to perform more reflection, more examination, more meditation, called tapasya, more austerity. And so satapo tapyata satapus tapva. And then he comes to this conclusion. Prano brahmate vyajanat. He knew, he came to this conclusion, in other words, that this Brahman is actually life, whatever that means. There's a wonderful series of talks by Erwin Schrödinger here in Dublin. The great scientist Erwin Schrödinger spent some 10 years in Dublin, and he was examining this thing from a physicist's point of view, but he knew a lot of biology. And he was struggling with this whole idea. So a series of talks comes under the title, published, What is Life? This question is asked. And curiously, he describes the inner workings of the chromosome that had not been discovered in his day. It was only discovered much later. by Crick and Watson. And they discovered the structure, the inward structure, the architectural structure inside the nucleus of every cell called DNA. But he didn't know that at that time, and he suggests that there's some kind of crystalline structure, some kind of we know that there are regular crystalline structures. This was a kind of irregular crystalline structure that he is proposing, an isometric crystal. And so, in fact, in principle, he was absolutely correct. And where did he get it from? He must have done the same thing as this. He must have reflected, he must have thought profoundly about it. And that's his conclusion that he comes to. So anyway, what is life? Well, Bhrigu comes to this conclusion that life is actually the origin of everything. And when we say life, we may just as well say energy, because the term is prano brahmati. That is energy. Energy, matter first, then energy. Energy, whole of what makes life, must be just energy. So energy, the enlivening thing, the thing that produces motion, that must be it. And now we come to another conclusion, Einstein's equation, that everything goes back to energy. This energy, potential energy, equals the mass of matter with all its Newtonian laws of motion, and to reconcile units to a wider, broader scale, a more manageable, reasonable scale beyond just a gram or something like that, or an erg. He has to bring in a standard unit. He brings in a constant, that is the speed of light, c squared. C squared really is only there to reconcile units. The real equation is everything is energy. That's basically it. So Einstein and Bhrigu have come to the same conclusion. Now, for truly, beings are born from this, and when born, they live by this energy, and into this energy, when departing, they go back. So, having thought he knew that, he again just verifies it, goes back to his father, Varuna, but obviously he thinks this is really not the answer. Because you see, the material objects of the world are explicable in terms of matter, plants take us to a higher level. They demand a different principle. So from materialism, we pass to what we might call vitalism. But the principle of life cannot account for conscious objects. That's the problem. And so the pupil, Bhrigu, is dissatisfied with this solution. And we come now to the modern quandary, what is consciousness? And it is said by some philosophers, oh, it's the hard problem of consciousness. How do you explain consciousness? It's more than just energy. So he goes back, and what's the answer? His father says, well, okay, go back then and reflect on this a lot more, meditate on this problem. So perform austerity again. Same formula is used. Satapo tapyate, satapus taptva. And then he comes to this conclusion. So mano brahmati vyajanat manasohya eva kalva imani bhutani jayanti. He knew, he came to a conclusion that that mind or consciousness is Brahman. And when we say consciousness, we're talking of objective consciousness. For truly, beings here are born from mind, and when born, they live by mind, and into mind, they depart. They enter back into this. It must be like that. So he's come to a conclusion of some consciousness, not understanding exactly what that might be, And having known that, he again approaches his father because he's on shaky ground again. And so when we look, for example, at animals with their perceptual and instinctive consciousness, we notice the inadequacy of this principle of life, because as life outreaches matter, so does mind also outreach life. So, of course, there are various forms of life without consciousness, but there can be no consciousness without life. So there's a quandary. So mind in the animals is of a kind of rudimentary character, if you like. It's not that it's absent, we know it's present, but in varying degrees. And so the rudimentary mind is distinguished from what we might call panna, that means reasoning. And animals possess the rudimentary mind, but not necessarily reasoning. So he sees a flaw in this. Even mind cannot account for all aspects of the universe. And in the world of man, he cannot account for all the aspects of the universe. He cannot account for intelligence. We have the play of what we might call intelligence. Intelligence, what is it? It frames concepts, ideals, plans, means for their realization, and he's using it himself as he's contemplating it. So there's an experiential thing that's going on. And so Bhrigu finds a kind of inadequacy with this principle of mind. And again, of course, he has to approach his father, and the formula is repeated, and he comes to this, intelligence is Brahman. Vijnanam, what is called Vijnanam, that is this causal entity. That is this Brahman. For truly beings are born from intelligence. And when born, they live by intelligence, and into intelligence, when departed, they enter. That's the criteria. Where are they coming from? How are they living? Where are they going? And so that's it. However, here's the flaw. Intelligence, again, is not the ultimate principle. The categories of matter, the categories of life, mind, intelligence, they take us higher and higher, and each is more comprehensive than the preceding one, there's no doubt. Each one is more subtle. But men with their conflicting desires, divided minds, oppressed by dualities, they're obviously not the final products of evolution. They have to be transcended. In the intellectual life, there's only a seeking until we manage to transcend it. And there can be no ultimate finding. An intellectual person, as we all are, who uses mind, life and body is greater than the mind. Life and body, but he is not the end of the cosmic evolution, as he has still a secret aspiration. I hope, even as matter has contained life and its secret destiny and had to be delivered of it, life itself contains mind, and mind contains intelligence, and intelligence contains spirit as its secret destiny and presses to be delivered of it. So intelligence, which is unstable, because don't forget the criteria is, we're looking for something that never changes. Something that is always vacillating and change cannot be blissful. And so a person's awareness is to be enlarged into a superconsciousness with illumination. With illumination providing joy, providing power, and the crown, the peak, the culmination of evolution is this kind of deified consciousness. So he knew that Brahman was not all of this. Now he comes to a conclusion. Anando Brahmate Vyajanat. He knew that Brahman is actually bliss. For It's a fact that beings here are born from bliss. When born, they live by bliss. Into bliss, when departing, they enter. Same form is repeated. And this wisdom of Bhrigu and Varuna, established in the highest heaven. Now, it's not an intellectual conclusion. It's not a philosophical conclusion. It's the conclusion, it's the experiential conclusion done by this process of tapasya, that is, this process of reflection, this internal journey, which we call meditation, and the revelation that comes from it. And so this is the highest discovery. My nature, therefore, is bliss. And so established in the highest heaven, the wisdom, the highest kind of conclusion is there. And the one who knows this becomes established in it, because knowledge is not you know at one moment and it's gone the next. I don't have to scratch my head and ask you every time we meet, please tell me what's my name. So knowledge is the lack of the necessity to repeat it. We no longer have to repeat it, it's knowledge. And then it becomes established. And that person becomes also the possessor of all the needs, all the master hierarchy of needs. It becomes the possessor of food, becomes the possessor of the one that consumes the food, becomes great in abundance. In the old days, it was measured in offspring and cattle, and in the splendor of sacred wisdom, great in fame. In other words, all the things come to us unasked when we go to this route. Now, why should that be? It is there because when you go to the origin of something, the highest generalization of something, you really have taken care of everything else. When you come to the primary cause, that is, don't forget, the origin, the one that keeps it going, and into which everything is going, that one without a second, presenting itself as manifesting, presenting itself as life and matter and intellect and so on, intelligence and so on, and seemingly coming and seemingly going, but doesn't, because it is blissful. Its nature is bliss. And so, when we discover this, then it takes care of all our needs, since it is the source of all of the rest. Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, other things will be added unto thee. We may add by itself, by themselves, whatever you want. So it's worth repeating. The one who knows this becomes established, and that person becomes the possessor of food and the eater of food. In other words, will have abundance in wealth, will always be sustained, will have shelter, will have food, will have all their needs met, becomes great in offspring and cattle. In other words, in modern language, will have abundance, monetary abundance, wealth comes to them. And the splendor of sacred wisdom also, because without that you will misuse the money, you'll misuse the abundance, and you'll be famous. That's basically what it's saying. So the higher includes the lower, and the higher actually goes beyond it. Brahman is the deep delight of freedom. And so this Upanishad will suggest an analogy between this macrocosm that we call the universe, this macrocosmic nature, and the microcosm of man. An equation between intelligibility and being. And the ascent of reality from the beginning, from matter to God, as one of increasing likeness to God is brought out. And so while we have all these increasing likeness to God is brought out, while we have all of these five elements in our being, we could stress one or the other, but the five elements are in our being, and these five elements, just to remind you, matter, vital force, and then we have mind, and then we have intellect, and finally we have this bliss. So if you can harmonize all of these things, you are complete. In other words, your seeking is finished. There's nothing to seek anymore. It is all this fullness. And I think it was, well, it certainly was St. Augustine, if you talk about Christianity, he describes the highest state as one of joy. We tend to think of the highest state as, well, let us take, for example, Muslim architecture. When the Muslims conquered Jerusalem, they didn't have any architectural style, and they took the dome of the rock, they took the rock, and they built a most wonderful, wonderful structure, an octagonal structure, the dome of the rock structure, which is not really a mosque. It is more of a place of pilgrimage, which holds a kind of sense of mysticism. And there we find the most amazing mosaics. And the key to the mosaics will be a portrait of everything that is not desert. Water, springs. If you go to Spain, for example, you go to, what's the place in Spain? You'll tell me shortly, where it's on the tip of my tongue, where they have this magnificent Alhambra Palace, Granada is it, on the top of a hill. And the engineering that it took to take water from another place so that it comes out as springs, fountains, creating water for exotic gardens and plants. The most marvelous sight, no doubt. So water, trees, abundance, fruits, perfumes, all of this can be kind of described in terms of a feeling of joy, a feeling of pleasure, a feeling of bliss. But this is not what is meant. The highest state as one of joy, not a material joy or a post-mortem material joy. The highest spiritual state of the soul in this life consists in the vision and contemplation of truth, truth that doesn't change. And in that are joys and the full enjoyment of the highest and the highest good. If you have truth, then you have knowledge. If you don't have truth, you cannot have knowledge. And if you have knowledge, you have truth. And if you have bliss, you have both knowledge and truth. So the grades of existence, of value, correspond to, so that the class which has the lowest degree of reality is the existential sense, has the lowest degree of value, and then as we go more subtly, our notion of reality becomes a little different. So behind all our growth is the perfection really of ourselves. And that perfection is the thing which by its presence animates everything. And so this Upanishad, this Taittiriya Upanishad, would suggest an epic, a story of the universe itself. From out of almost utter nothingness, Asat, arises the stellar dance of teeming suns and planets, whirling through the vast, we might say, etheric fields. And in this immensity of space emerges this mystery of life, vegetations, parks, forests, and living creatures, crawling, jumping animals, predecessors of human beings. Human intelligence, with its striving for ideals, has in it the secret of sciences and the secret of all philosophies and the secret of also cultures and civilizations. So we can make the world wonderful, we can make the world beautiful, or we can make it tragic or evil. It's entirely up to how we interpret it. If we are able to interpret it as the Upanishads interpret it, we have absolutely no problems. We have no fears, We have no difficulties. And so sometimes it's necessary to do that analysis. We can do it in meditation, but we can have that living with us also in our day-to-day life, in our normal, everyday experience. The ability to peep behind all the various layers and there see the blissful nature of that one without a second that doesn't change, where mind comes back together with words and concepts. So these are just a few thoughts based on the Taittiriya Upanishad, the story of Bhṛgu. And these stories are very valuable because otherwise we'll find the Upanishads full of dry philosophy, and the commentators and the commentaries also can be very confusing with objections and answers and discussions and various points of view which purely go into the headiness of things. All right. Anyway, that's what we developed this evening. This is why it's very well worth studying these Upanishads, And when we come across stories like this, they become quite valuable. Now, of course, from the devotee's point of view, this bliss is translated really as love. And I picked up a book this afternoon, some translations of Rumi, the great Sufi mystic. And so in my fashion of opening a book at a random page, it's like that. And so this is what I opened it up as. And it's only a few lines. But this is the key to how to meditate, is to take a few lines and then use it. Take the inspiration of what you opened, and then you can reflect on that. That reflection leads you to a contemplation of it and ultimately a meditation on it. To live without you, he says, and he's obviously addressing his beloved God, to live without you is to be robbed of love. And what is life without it? To live without you is death to me, my love, but some call it life. And most call it life, actually. And of course, we live with love. Love is so beautiful. Love is one of the most beautiful expressions because Rumi is using a romantic metaphors and analogies all the time. And really, to the devotees, the human love is echoed, or the divine love, we might say, is echoed in human love, and vice versa too. So he says on another page, the king who stole my heart sent a message with a butterfly. It said, I am yours, and 100 candles burst into flame. There's a particular devotee who gets extremely excited every time he sees a butterfly in the summer. And he's had many losses in his life, family losses. But he always, when he sees this butterfly, he says, that reminds me of the soul that departed. And perhaps this butterfly is an angel come to remind me all is well, actually. And I'm not lost to you. So we have to have eyes to register and see things in a poetic way, in a beautiful way, and see that the foundation of everything really is bliss. It is not only existence itself, it is not only knowledge itself or consciousness itself, but it is also fundamentally, it is bliss. Why don't we not only dip our toes in, why don't we plunge into it? This question I'll leave you to answer for yourselves. All right. They say that when you wake up in the morning, it can be an eye-opening experience. All right. Well, if there's nothing further, we'll draw a line. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.